Saturday, March 18th, 2017.
Today on the Bro Canadian Newscast.
In local news, we'll be covering Douglas Garland.
In national news, we'll be discussing the Genetic Discrimination Bill.
And in international news, we'll be covering the CIA leak.
I'm Bandringer.
And I'm the Dino Man.
And this is
the Bro Canadian Newscast!
Two guys with more time than money to spare, discussing local to world affairs. There's Bandringer first with the Dino Man last. Here's the Bro Canadian Newscast.
So, how has your 2 weeks been?
Oh, it's been more than 2 weeks, man. It's been ages.
It's been a little bit more than 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's been more than 2 weeks. No, it's been good. Work's picked up a fair bit, not near like your work has.
Yeah, I worked like 10 days in a row, and so we didn't get to a podcast next week. I apologize to the less than tens of fans that we have here on the internet.
Hey, it's alright. They understand. Probably most of them were in Edmonton when that snowfall hit, so...
That is a good point. Yeah, it snowed a lot.
Yeah.
We were gonna get to recording yesterday, but then the last gasp of winter hit us and got some wet snow that I had to clear out, so that was... Yeah.
We're probably done for the year, though.
Probably.
Yeah.
Saw a couple movies over the last couple of days.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I saw Logan yesterday, and I saw Beauty and the Beast tonight. But yesterday?
Tonight? You mean...
I saw it yesterday. Logan I saw the day before yesterday.
Ah, I see.
Both was quite good. Logan was excellent, I would say. Beauty and the Beast was decent. It felt like a decent cover of a song. Like, it follows basically the same beats. And the tweaks they make to the story, most of them add pretty much nothing. I would say that the tweaks that they made to the LeFou character were quite successful.
Alright. We're doing a movie review now, eh?
No, I'm just gonna... Can I just say that
just say.
There was a bit of controversy. Are you aware of this controversy?
No, I'm not.
But the new Beauty and the Beast live-action remake. So Josh Gad is playing LeFou, which...
Oh, right, the gay controversy thing.
It really actually helps the character to have LeFou be gay.
It does?
Well, yeah, because his doting on Gaston makes much more sense. They play with that a bit, and
Isn't it kind of really... He's really stereotypically gay, though?
I mean, I guess, but I think it works.
Alright.
To have him be kind of obviously... kind of...
in love with Gaston?
Like, they're best friends, but you can tell LeFou kind of wants more. It's kind of how they play it.
You're not insinuating anything right now, are you?
Are you implying that you are the LeFou to my Gaston?
No, I'm definitely Gaston. Look at this mane. And these muscles.
I mean, that would imply that one of us is oafish and villainous.
Oh, yeah, I guess I'm not that.
LeFou, by the way, makes... Oh, no, I'm spoiling, but I was about to use a wrestling terminology for a thing that happens.
Ah, well, you spoiled it for me now.
Oh, okay.
Alright.
Yeah.
Well, let's head into local news. Enough gabbing.
Oh, we have some updates, though.
Oh, right, that's true.
We have several updates.
So first off, we have the story that we covered with the Philippine drug war, which apparently is named Operation Double Barrel, because that's what you'd say when you want to arrest a bunch of people.
It's very manly.
Yeah.
And such.
So there's been a report by the Human Rights Watch that looked at it because we talked about all the vigilante killings. Well, they've started looking into some of the police killings and have found significant discrepancies between the police reports and the eyewitness testimonies, and there's basically they think that the police are planting drugs and guns and weapons to claim self-defense in a lot of these killings and are actually just shooting people in cold blood.
Yeah, like we talked about the corruption a little bit earlier that had kind of stalled some of the efforts in the drug war and killed, I believe, a South Korean businessman.
Yeah.
So it's not a huge surprise that there is further corruption, and with the focus being on eliminating as many drug users and dealers as possible, obviously there's very little accountability towards the police in who they kill. So this isn't a huge surprise, but just a little bit of a follow-up. In addition, there's been a very recent development on the Conservative Party leadership. I first heard about this story on CBC Radio, and at first it just seemed like Kevin O'Leary spouting off, as he does, about
Trump-like fear-mongering.
Yeah, vote rigging, where people were buying party memberships anonymously and illegitimately in order to
affect the conservative race.
Yeah, which it can be done because it's by writing. Mm-hmm. Often the deciding vote could be a very small amount of actual people.
Yeah. And I mean, on that front, I was on Reddit and people were talking about buying memberships even if you're not conservative. So there are people who are definitely thinking about doing this in a legitimate fashion.
Yes.
But he was claiming something far different. And then
there was an announcement that the Conservative Party has struck more than 1,300 names off membership lists after they investigated and found that they were basically all bought from two internet ISP addresses through prepaid credit cards to as be anonymous. So it seems like there has been some shenaniganry.
Yeah, whatever. Some shenanigans.
Chicanery is a good word.
Chicanery doesn't mean that, though.
What does chicanery mean?
It's to do with noise, I believe, and, like, loud.
Okay. There have been some shenanigans and chicanery.
Okay. Well, you see O'Leary's yelling face, so yeah. It's true, and so it's a really interesting development because that can totally turn... If those were allowed to remain, that could totally turn the tables on this.
Yeah, it's still a chaotic race because you still have 14 people.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a ranked ballot system.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody is going to get it on first ballot with a majority of first place votes. Yeah. It's going to go to second, third, fourth, fifth choices. And in addition to that, the complicating factor of it being by writing as opposed to a pure popular vote.
Yeah.
It's just going to be really interesting. And it could be simply decided by a few votes in a, urban riding in Quebec where there's 5 conservative members.
Yeah. It's the weird thing where you get the conservatives who usually have no say because they're in the middle of a hugely liberal riding.
Yeah.
Now have a lot of the say relatively.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as that develops further. I think that's about all we have for updates. Do you have anything else?
No, I believe that covers it. I think
Trump is still trumping around, right?
Well, yeah, but we'll talk more about that in the future. I'm sure. I want to talk about his budget.
Okay.
His budget is interesting.
Interesting is the nice way to put it.
Interesting is a non-word.
Okay.
All right. So, to local news. Unfortunately, we have some kind of dour local news, but might as well cover the story. So, a lot of you have probably heard the name Douglas Garland. It's been bumping around. I don't love to talk about, killers for the whole reason of emphasizing their crimes, but you need to because this story actually revolves around him being the victim, interestingly enough. So, let's cover who he is.
Okay.
So, he is a guy who used to have a business relationship with this man and his son. He got jilted. They were working on a project together. He was doing work on it, but was not going to be given credit for or a piece of the pie. Yeah, he got upset by that. Well, years later, in June 29th of 2014, the older of the two, the father, the grandfather of this one boy, Nathan, who was staying with him and his wife, all of them were together, and Douglas Garland broke into their house and violently kidnapped them. There is blood spatter patterns. There's a bloody handprint on the wall of the child. It's horrible. And through it, I don't say alleged here because he has now been convicted, and there's all sorts of evidence there. There's evidence at his acreage from aerial photographs showing a figure with bodies, as well as there's a barrel where he burned the bodies. And evidence of their blood and stuff still at his farm. So this is what he did. And his motive was a fairly petty grudge. Through interviews with this guy and whatnot, it's been pretty much decided that he has big issues. Big issues. When you're talking about the prison system, there's probably not a lot of rehabilitation. So consequently, the public has been very, very against him.
His trial has been a big story locally for several weeks now.
Well, he killed a 5-year-old boy. So
so it's been a very kind of a staple of local news coverage in the area because it is a fairly monumentally horrific killing.
Yeah. And we don't get that much here in Canada. Period.
Yeah, a monumentally horrific killing where the killer shows very little remorse. Where the killer does not appear to have any sort of diagnosable mental illness as well. Where he wasn't like the guy in the Greyhound, who was off his schizophrenia meds. Yes, exactly. Yeah, he was not pleading insanity. It was, I believe, didn't he go through several different lawyers?
I believe so.
Because he kind of didn't want to take the advice of the lawyers. Probably why he went to trial.
Yeah,
he might have been able to get parole in. Well, maybe not. Really,
looking at this is that's where we stand on him.
Yeah.
So why this is local, more recent news because he was convicted in February.
Yeah, and what was his sentence specifically?
His sentence was a life sentence with no chance of parole for 75 years. So
a life in jail sentence.
Life in prison.
Yeah, right. For those who don't know, prison is where you go after your sentence. Jail is where you are held for trial.
Yeah. There are a few cases if you're sentenced for, I think it's under 30 days, you can spend it in jail.
Okay.
Instead of prison.
It's not really relevant for this particular
it's not.
case.
He's not in there for a month. So he was first in a Calgary jail, which is where this division becomes important.
Yep.
And so he's just in there with a bunch of kind of random guys. And he got heavily assaulted and got thrown in the hospital. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was still... And this is we're talking like a 54-year-old man here.
Yeah.
So he's not exactly physically in his prime.
Yeah.
And that's because he's a child killer. So his fellow inmates felt strongly about that. So then he got moved to the Edmonton high security place in a unit that's supposedly quite quiet. And then in March 7th, he got assaulted again. Mm-hmm. So this is something where they're concerned about how to, because you start talking about solitary confinement and stuff, you come into the whole problems with, the torture element of it.
Yes, solitary confinement is horrific. There has recently been several instances, I don't remember the exact names involved, but there's been investigation into the overuse of solitary confinement in the Canadian legal system. Mm-hmm. And it is, I believe, United Nations Human Rights Watches do not basically allow it for an extended period of time.
No. It's been called torture for any sort of long length of time, which it is. I mean, because the way it works just racks your psyche.
Yeah, you lose track of time. You lose track of you lose the sense of self almost.
Yeah. You're unable to socialize with anybody because the guards they're usually very standoffish and don't talk to you, so you have no social contact, which sounds like awesome if you're an introverted person, but even introverted people need social contact.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't last long without it.
So they really don't have that many options. You need to work really hard in order to keep this murderer safe, and that's an odd situation.
The thing is in these more recent things, he is the victim, and it does not... I realize he has been sentenced, but he's been sentenced for life in prison, as we said. He has not been sentenced for, beatings in the prison yard all the time.
Yes.
And it doesn't help the matter that, generally the public outcry is largely in favor of the people assaulting him, which I was reading an interesting perspective from a defense lawyer, and he's basically saying you're taking all these people, because everybody else in prison there, especially in a higher security, are violent offenders, and you're condoning them to do violent things, which is the exact thing you're trying to rehabilitate out of them.
Yes, although, as we said, Douglas Garland is most likely, a very high probability, not someone who can be rehabilitated. This is based on his remarks and his behavior during the entire trial process. The other offenders that might be in his unit might not have life without parole type sentences, where they might be able to become functioning members of society. And that is a good point, because teaching people that violence is an option is not necessarily something that you can confine to just this one case.
Yeah. Yeah, because you got to realize that, like, the people who are assaulting him are criminals. They've been incarcerated, and generally for things very much like what they're currently doing, which is what you're punishing them for. So allowing them to do that is, it's not good, and it doesn't help the process. And on top of that, you're saying that the Canadian justice system is insufficient. Yeah. Like, he's got 75 years in prison. He's never getting out. Like, it's been determined by Canadian courts that is his punishment for his crime. And as soon as you start adding stuff on, you feel like he doesn't have it bad enough. And you start getting into vendetta territory with that.
It's problematic, I would say, to essentially sentence people to torture, not as torture as we talk about in other instances, as an interrogation tactic, but more as a punitive tactic.
Yeah.
That gets into very iffy territory. I don't really want to be in a society. I don't want to go back to corporal punishment.
Yeah.
As to go back to, somebody steals something and we start caning them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that is what we want to do as a society.
Well, and it's interesting too, because, like, now this is probably a little more American centric, but a lot of times when you look at the backwater countries, the Middle East often gets picked on. People look at their, like, barbaric justice systems and how people are, like, being killed for stuff. And on one hand, people here are completely, against that and horrified by it. But then you get cases like this where, you jump onto Twitter. I know Twitter, like the source of all awesome knowledge. But you jump on there and pretty much everybody is saying, go criminals beating him up. People are saying, I hope it happens again. I hope you die from this, right? Canada should have the death penalty. So it's interesting that you can decry people in countries where that's the law, but then when that isn't the law, then you have a whole bunch of people.
Yeah,
I don't see how they can hold those two opposing views in their mind.
I mean, there has been recently in the news, there has been additional problems with the justice system. There's been the riots in I believe it's Saskatchewan prison, which have resulted. Listening to an interview with someone who had spent time in prison and now is kind of a prisoner advocate, has turned his life around. And he was saying that a lot of the prisons currently are quite overcrowded. This is due to the mandatory minimum sentencing laws that were under effect in the Harper government.
Yep.
Where the judges can't use their discretion in non-violent cases to give more community service type sentences.
No, they have to give the time
and that results in more people in bars, which is expensive. Mm-hmm. Which is expensive not because it costs a lot of money to feed and house inmates, but because those people are obviously not paying taxes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that might have contributed to this particular case, but a better funded prison system with less prisoners per guard ratio might be help.
Fewer.
I will kill you one of these days.
You will.
And then
you'll get that. You'll get the hang of it, less and fewer.
Okay. I was just about to make a dark joke about me landing in the same unit with Douglas Garland killing you at that, okay? I was going to make a dark joke.
Yeah.
And it would have been bad. So with that, do you have anything, I don't know.
No, with regards to this, I would just try to use situations like this to actually check how you feel and think about things and actually analyze. If you actually think like, oh, these these beatings are you condone them, then you've got to question like what you think about how our current justice system works and all these sort of things. I think if you just take it without actually analyzing why you think that way, it can be very dangerous. And ultimately, I think yes, he deserves to do the time, but you still need to have pity for another human being being assaulted.
Yeah.
Right?
The other thing is, like, if you believe that beatings are justified in this case, you have to ask yourself, how narrow is your scope for that? Is it just cases like this? Are you going to expand it? I would say, like, he has gotten basically the harshest sentence possible by Canadian law.
Yeah.
He will spend the rest of his life in jail. Which, even in prison, sorry.
There you go.
And I think that is more than justified in this particular case. But to add on any more to that starts to feel vindictive. The role of law and government is to moderate and to deal with these things in a civilized manner. When this happens, we don't deal with it by getting a posse together of the family of the victim in order to hunt down and murder and kill this Douglas Garland. We prosecute them via our government and law systems. And it is better to do that because violence tends to breed more violence, to breed more violence. Arguing in favor of the rule of law over the rule of prison hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you think that there should be different punishments, sure, but have that legally in place.
Yes. And I don't think it behooves and benefits really anyone to add in corporal punishments for anything. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to put in a death penalty because of the, besides the moral argument against and ethical arguments against the death penalty, and besides the fact that if you put in the death penalty, you will end up killing innocent people eventually.
And spending more money per
I was just going to get to that, that because of the amount of appeals that end up in a death penalty, and because of the surprising difficulty in killing someone in a humane manner, you're going to end up spending more money than if you just put them in jail. Prison, sorry.
You'll get it.
If you end up putting less or fewer people into jail or prison. Pick whichever one of those words is right in your head. This is an exercise. Here's a fun game. Figure out what the right words were and post that in the comments. And Christian will say if you're correct or not.
Yay, sure. Alright.
So I think we should move on to our national story.
I do believe so.
So recently there was a vote on a genetic discrimination bill put towards the House of Commons, and a little bit of an interesting result for reasons we'll get into, but it passed. Both the Conservative and the New Democrats voted for, as well as Liberal backbenchers. So that's just a bit of a preview for what's to come. Why don't you get into a little bit of the details of what this particular bill does?
Alright, this bill in 3 parts seeks to prevent genetic discrimination. Now what that is, it honestly, best examples, think of the old movie Gattaca. It's the idea that whatever your genes are, what you might be genetically predisposed to, this bill prevents you from being discriminated based on that. Now there are the 3 separate areas. The first one kind of goes along with the services as well as contracts. So this is where your kind of insurance would come in. So this bill would prevent insurance companies from either making you disclose, if you've already taken a genetic test, what your results are, or forcing you to take a genetic test to either access the services or get an amendment on the services or anything like that. So this bill basically, you are never forced or you are never enticed to disclose your genetic, the genetic information they're asking for. The other area is adjusting the labor code. So ensuring that employers cannot discriminate on this. Now, this really isn't common.
No.
Really at all. But it's put in place. You could argue it's preventative. And then the final one is putting it in the whole human rights list, which is along with, sexual orientation and, gender identity and those kind of things, as well as race, religion, and age and, sex.
The usual.
So this is just going to be adding this as well to that.
Okay, so I think it's interesting to note that the U.S. has had similar regulations in place since 2008. Now, it's interesting to note as well that currently insurance providers do not generally require anyone to do a genetic test. The only cases where they're even asked, they tend to ask for the results of a genetic test if someone is asking for a life insurance policy over $250,000.
Yeah, which is a minority of the
which is
policies.
A minority of life insurance policies. It's also interesting to note that there have been around 300 cases per year brought before the courts on this type of bill.
This is in the States.
Yeah, in the States, most of which have to do with the provision of basic health care, which would not be an issue in Canada because basic health care is universal. Mm-hmm. So it is questionable on how much effect this bill will actually have.
Yeah. Another thing to note, like, the angle, with regards to the human rights thing, that's nice to put it in writing, but not really going to change anything. Yeah. And when it comes to employers, there's basically no employers that have discriminated based on genetic tests. Like, McDonald's ain't gonna fire your butt if you got a chance of breast cancer or something. Yeah. But where it does come down is, right, with the insurance, particularly, like, life or health, and we do have, not basic health, but we do have other insurance. But the thing is they, everyone should know, they already do discriminate, right? They have their tables, and they determine what your risk factor is and bill you accordingly. Okay. And so, like, if you smoke regularly, that increases your premiums, right? And now they can't do a genetic test, but they still ask about family history.
Yes.
Which, we're talking genetics, is pretty much a rinky-dink way of doing a genetic test.
Yeah, very, very true. So, this bill has gotten a lot of pushback from the insurance industry saying, they're saying that it will raise premiums by, like, 30% for men and
50%
for women. You can definitely doubt the validity of those statistics, but those are what they are. And one of the more interesting things about this particular vote is that it was a free vote. The Liberal government did not coerce its members to vote the way that its government wanted. If the Liberal government wanted to, it could force its members to, but they decided not to. Yep. And the vote was passed by a margin of 222 to 60, with as I said, the Conservative and the New Democrat MPs voting for. But the Liberals that voted against this bill were the members of the cabinet. Yeah. The Liberal government's position is that it might be unconstitutional because it would intrude on provincial jurisdiction, that this was a matter for the provinces. Also, I believe that they were convinced by the insurance company's arguments that this would raise premiums. Now, again, this is not something that insurance companies do extensively right now.
Yeah.
And so this is perhaps more preventative and might play more and more in future than it might actually do. There's some interesting analogies to come into play with rights involving tracking devices on cars.
Vehicles, yeah.
In the States, and more in Canada, you can put a tracking device on your vehicle for a discount on your premiums. This tracking monitor will monitor your driving behavior and how safe you are. And if you are safe, then it will lower your premiums. And this is kind of on a similar principle. So there's a lot of debate on this particular issue.
Yeah, so I think that basically covers kind of the important things. By the way, if you're looking for the bill, it's called S201.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably good if you want to look up this bill and look at it for yourself. And I mean, yeah, there has been pushback, and there's questions of why Trudeau and the cabinet, went against it. All the backbenchers went with it, and that's the thing that's amazing there is that basically meant the minority of government the majority got their say, but the minority of parties got their say, right? Because the Liberals do hold a majority.
Yes.
So that is probably one of the more interesting things about this, and the fact
it's rather rare in Canadian politics for MPs to go against the wishes of their party.
Yeah,
it doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah, and so this thing does, it is still hopping towards the Senate, but it will pass.
Yeah.
And it's not going to change your life. We're not telling you because of that. But, I mean, it is something put in, and it kind of furthers Canada along that line of trying to increase the human rights, extend them further and further. And, I mean, there are questions about whether, the genetic tests can do loads of good.
Yes, definitely.
Genetic tests have been used, you can use them to screen for what medications you'd react better, specifically in cancer treatments. You can use them to actually tell about your risk of things and then thereby take actions to minimize your risk in other areas if you're genetically predisposed. There's a lot of good, and generally in the medical, in medical care, if you're ever asked to do a genetic test, I would definitely, go ahead and do it, because that would definitely help you understand what your risks are, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the question then becomes, can you actually take this thing where you have no control of and discriminate on it? And it's been decided that no, you cannot. So
yeah, and again, it's the applications for this will mostly be in the insurance industry, where one could definitely argue that the insurance industry would be more able to calculate costs more accurately.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of their job. That's kind of that's the business that they're in, is to calculate the costs, the chances of you dying, the chances of you getting illness, and therefore what it should cost you to insure yourself against that possibility.
Mm-hmm.
That's the business they're in. So you could definitely argue that they should have a right to that information in certain cases. Not necessarily every case. I'm not going to go that far, but I'm just making an argument. I'm not even sure where I actually sit on whether this is a good or bad thing.
The thing too is when you come to insurance though, like it's different in the States because healthcare insurance is basically mandatory. But when you're talking about insurance too, there's always the question of, okay, let's say you have a whole bunch of genetic predispositions, then you're running into the whole reason why the Americans brought in Obamacare is that some people can't afford insurance just because of genetic predispositions.
Yes, there's that.
And you run that danger when you start. Now, as we said, you're still going to be discriminated on by insurance companies, right? If you smoke, like, you're going to pay more.
Yeah, if you smoke, your mother and father died of heart attacks at 40, and you want to get a life insurance policy, your premiums will be much higher than the person that does not smoke, and father and mother and grandfather and great-grandfather and great-grandmother are still alive.
Yeah, and I mean, even simple things like gender, I'm pretty sure women pay less for insurance than men.
For life insurance.
Most
likely health insurance might be
very different, yeah, but life insurance for sure. And that's the thing where you could be the most safe guy who doesn't take any chances, but, you know, the discrimination is still going to occur. So that's why I say it's not really going to change. I mean, honestly, I don't know even if they did straight genetic testing, how much that would change premiums. Yeah. But it's nice to take a stand against some of this, right? And say, that's going too far.
Yeah, I just don't know, like, it's different here because, as we said, all your main healthcare costs will be covered. Most people when they get supplemental health coverage, that's mostly for ambulance, for drug costs.
That's the big one, yeah.
Those are the big ones, possibly for supplemental income if you're on disability, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if most of that is through work, and it's like I had a healthcare plan when I was a student, right?
Yeah.
And like nobody was gonna ever do a genetic test on anyone there.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed from what we were reading earlier in prep for the show that most of the genetic testing was done under large life insurance policies currently, which makes some sense.
Yeah, no, when you're insuring for that much money, they want to know more. But perhaps we should end this with a little anecdote.
Oh, we're getting.
You want to tell us the story of Eddie Curry?
Okay, Eddie Curry. I'm a big basketball fan. And a few years ago, there was this center who played for the Chicago Bulls, and then brief as well for the New York Knicks. And he had a heart condition. And this heart condition, I believe it was an enlarged heart specifically, had claimed the lives of a couple of basketball players in the past. And the Chicago Bulls, who were Eddie Curry's employer, wanted him to take a genetic test. Eddie Curry refused. Now, it's important to note that the Chicago Bulls did offer him a stipend if he failed of like $400,000 for 50 years if he went and failed the genetic test. But he never took the test. Now, he was cleared by other experts, but he never ended up taking the test, the genetic test. His story became tragic and lurid in a lot of ways that we won't particularly get into. But it's interesting, like, that this issue of genetic tests has come up. It has been an issue.
And this is an employment example, which is, albeit more rare, but in sports, I guess that does make a degree of sense. That's where it would
he was, I believe, after the Chicago Bulls did not offer him a contract, he spent some time with the New York Knicks, and then he spent some time overseas in China, and it became a tragic case in a lot of ways, which we won't get into. But yeah, this has been an issue. So it'll be interesting to see as technology develops and genetic tests become more and more common. It'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah.
I think we should go on to our national news. What do you think?
I think we should go to our international news.
What did I say?
National.
Did I say national? I thought it said international.
You said East is national.
Okay. We should talk about this for more.
All right, so 7th of March, which is actually interesting. We talked about that date once before.
What was that date?
That was the date that Garland was beat up.
Oh, okay.
But another thing happened on the 7th of March.
Okay.
And this is when WikiLeaks released the Year Zero, or the Vault 7 leak, the Year Zero group, whatever it is.
They released a boatload of hacking stuff that the CIA had.
8,761 documents.
I wonder what the 8,761st document was. Like, what's the last one?
Oh, we could probably look it up, right? Because it's publicly available, but...
let's not.
Anyway. So, yeah, the leak was called Vault 7, and it's a bunch of CIA documents all focused on their kind of cyber security kind of angle. So basically there were some interesting notes if you parse through them. First off, the CIA hackers actually were targeting both computers and smartphones. They were repurposing sometimes malware that existed. Malware, if you don't know, is the computers that kind of very discreetly go on your computer and either do like key logging or affect, so the more overt ones give you like, you know, the bad toolbars and the links and the websites and all that sort of jazz. So they basically repurposed these and also utilized a bunch of, not loopholes, but they utilized a bunch of,
exploits
in different software. Yeah. And they didn't, there was an agreement made between the CIA and a lot of businesses that if they found major exploits, they would let the businesses know, right?
Yeah.
National security and like. Well, they didn't. They sat on a pile of these suckers and they were able to do a lot of interesting things like activate Samsung smart TVs in a like quiet mode where it was looking like it was off, but it was recording what you were saying.
Yeah, exploits into smartphones, computers, Android phones, operating systems, all sorts of vulnerabilities in all of these devices and operating systems that the manufacturers were not aware of. Now, this is important to note not only because it allows the CIA to get into all these devices and use them to monitor, use them to get into information, get at incriminating information that it can use for counterterrorism. But it's also interesting to note because these types of exploits could definitely be found by more insidious members of society for more insidious purposes, for the purposes of identity theft, for blackmail. If anybody becomes, for any reason, a target of any sort of nefarious group.
Like some hacktivist group, like Anonymous or something.
Anonymous. Yeah. You know, if anybody runs afoul of a tech-savvy member of a Gamergate-like community or any sort of a harassment campaign.
Yeah, no, this...
Or any harassment campaign because somebody said something stupid about AIDS in Africa and somebody got really mad about it, Now,
an interesting thing, too, about this is that a lot of times it comes across encryption, but it doesn't actually break the encryption. Encryption is set up generally so that it's almost impossible to brute force through it.
Yeah.
And the way that it dealt with encryption, a lot of their strategies were just circumventing it somehow.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. It's like, can't use the door because the lock's too tough, climb in through the window.
That type of thing.
That kind of thing.
Another interesting note is that the CIA had a covert base in Frankfurt.
Yes.
That covered a lot of cyber intelligence activities.
Some of the documents leaked actually were like instructions on like how to go through customs because they're not, it's secret. It
was at a U.S. consulate.
Yeah, it's in the consulate in Frankfurt. So they were supposed to like get through customs and they were telling them what to say, that they were like helping with the tech at the consulate.
Yeah.
And then also the emails like saying, oh yeah, also this airline gives you free booze, so have fun.
Yeah. So now this data has been parsed by intelligence experts and has been deemed to be authentic. The people that study this type of thing think that it is legitimate intel. Now, it might be interesting to note that this was done by WikiLeaks, which you may know from being in the news most recently over the whole
Hillary stuff.
Whole Hillary email stuff.
Yeah.
They leaked a whole host of Democrat DNC emails, which, in the opinion of the intelligence community, that those were hacked by Russia and then given to WikiLeaks to disseminate.
Yeah, well, I mean, Snowden is currently in hiding in Russia, who did leak those.
Yeah.
And then,
not the Hillary emails.
Oh, right. Snowden did the other...
The NSA leaks.
The NSA leaks.
Which is important to note that this is not... Most intelligence officials say that this is not quite as large of a leak as the Edward Snowden leaks.
Yeah, this isn't as large. But a lot of these leaks that have happened, Snowden being now covered by Russia, Julian Assange, who runs WikiLeaks, there's been talk about him having ties to Russia, especially if you consider that, some of the stuff leaked during the campaign trail was more centric on Hillary, arguably.
Well, it also was found that the Russian hackers did hack both the RNC and the DNC, but they only disseminated the dirt that they found on the DNC, so you kind of know the partisan a spin of what is leaking through WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
That does not mean that this information is illegitimate, but it's important to note where it's coming from. Again, this is a very legitimate in Tacoma.
But you don't necessarily know, quote unquote, the whole story, just because there's no information on this other party doesn't mean that there's no dirt under their fingernails either, right?
Well, yeah. We know that Russia is doing a lot of
and so,
stuff.
about this leak too, a lot of the stuff that's come out about this has happened during the Obama administration. Yeah. Well, I mean, the Trump administration is relatively new, so you can't talk
this is all old stuff.
So this is all old stuff from the Obama administration, which could arguably be an attempt to make Obama and thereby the Democrats look bad.
Well, make America look bad.
Yeah.
I would say if I was just, positing. If in fact this leak was sourced from Russian sources or influenced by Russian sources, which it may not have been.
So I guess the question then is how does this concern people? How do you react to this?
Yeah.
And I think one of the big revelations from this, given all those exploits and the insecurities that were found, I think the biggest thing is to realize that if ever you're hooked up to the internet, you are not secure. Even if you think you're secure, you're not secure. You go to the airport, you have security theater. You do so on the computer as well. Now, granted, that does prevent a lot of the upfront stuff, right? Like a password on your computer will prevent your roommate or your friend who comes over from getting access to it. Mm-hmm. But it does not mean that nobody can get access to it. And you hear stories of Mark Zuckerberg and a bunch of those into tech kind of famous celebrities covering up their laptops with tape or their webcams on their laptops with tape and doing physical measures. And one could argue that that's something you may want to consider. Just also, realizing that your information may not be safe.
Yep, just be cautious and be careful and be serious about how you are secure online. We really don't care that the CIA is looking in right now and realizes that neither of us are wearing any pants.
Does not matter in the slightest.
We just shared that with all of you, that neither of us are wearing pants. It's up to you whether you decide whether we're, in your imagination, whether we're wearing underwear or not. You, the listener, get to decide.
You get that privilege.
Whether you want to imagine us without underwear or with underwear.
All right. But coming back to it, full circle. Yeah, there's that. Also, this can come into questions when you're starting to talk politics of freedom of information online and privacy online, and those kind of questions. To me, this is a wonderful example, all these exploits, as to why we should never have online voting, because that system would be so prone to wanting to be hacked. It's just the worst idea ever. And, well, not the worst, but it's up there. But yeah, there's you.
Worse? Is it worse or better than the Electoral College?
Oh, the Electoral College. That's supposed to save people's bacon, and it has not really yet. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the answer to that yes or no to that binary question that I gave, which yes. So be careful out there, people.
Yeah.
Look into cybersecurity is important, and there are many ways that people can get at your information. So be careful out there.
Yeah.
Why don't we go into some news that doesn't matter?
All right, news that doesn't matter. Okay, we're finally doing it. We're pulling the trigger. We're going to talk about Milo. I pushed that he's in the news that doesn't matter column because he wants all the attention because he's a troll, so I'm going to counter that.
So Milo, he's a guy.
British guy, born in Kent, England, 32 years old. Well, what's his deal?
So his deal, his deal is that, he was.
Well, he's a right wing, almost pundit at this point. He's a big supporter of Trump. The reason he's in the news recently was because of a scandal that just dropped. But before that, he's been with the alt-right group for quite some time.
Been doing a lot of stuff with Breitbart. He played a huge role in the Gamergate scandal, which we've talked about a number of times, criticizing the politicization of video game culture by an army of sociopathic feminist programmers and campaigners, abetted by achingly politically correct American tech bloggers. That is a mouthful of something right there.
Yeah.
So, it's also interesting to note that, before he was involved in Gamergate, you can dig up tweets of him mocking and making fun of gamers. So he's not really a gamer or a fan of the medium in any sense. He just kind of jumped in because he found a nice, niche to fill in the trolling market.
Yes, and that's a lot of what his career has gone. Breitbart writes super inflammatory articles. He got to write an article about, what was the wording?
Birth control makes women crazy and unattractive.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Coming from a gay man, by mind.
Yes, he's a very gay man.
Yeah. So, Gamergate, he was very involved with that, and which allowed him to basically troll and spread some hate towards, feminine game producers and game journalists, as like female game journalists, and get in all that mess. And then he jumped on the Trump train.
Jumped hard on that Trump train.
He started the Gays for Trump group.
Yes, he did. So you've been a big booster for Trump for a long time, and
he's given Trump a lot of in the kind of pasty white computer nerd crowd. He's brought a lot of those guys onto the Trump side. I'm almost certain.
Yes, because he had built up that cred, that Gamergate cred that you definitely want. Christian, do you want the Gamergate cred?
No.
Neither do I.
I don't care.
I feel like if I got Gamergate cred, I would be horrified because it's an indication that I probably did something very stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. So he jumped on that train and he got a lot of coverage because if you listen to interviews with him, love him or hate him, he's got a very vibrant style. And he's like your classic over the top, like.
Can I use the term flamboyant, or would that be offensive?
No, it'd be fine. He's very much the flamboyant kind of guy, and he has wonderful presence in interviews and stuff. Love him or hate him, he's incredibly riveting in a lot of that stuff.
So he spent a lot of time doing a lot of work for Breitbart. He started the Yiannopoulos Privilege Grant, which is one of my favorite little things. The grant planned to disperse. I'm trying to get through this with a straight face. Planned to disperse $2,500 to disadvantaged white men to assist them with their education. 8 months into the thing, it had not paid out any money and not filed any paperwork. So it was probably just a freaking publicity stunt.
Yep. Yeah.
You gotta, but his heart was in the right place.
Those poor disadvantaged white boys. I don't know any.
I don't know how...
We should have applied.
I mean, we're broke. We both kind of want to do more education.
Yeah, there we go.
Does that count as selling your soul to the devil?
So, this is the guy. So, he was actually pretty much the poster child. I mean, a lot of conservatives also loved him because he's so flamboyantly gay. They get to, like, hey, I'm not gay bashing. There's this gay guy that I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, and he... as well, he got kicked off Twitter.
Yes, that was...
kind of connected to the Gamergate controversy. There was a lot of pushback from the more recent...
Ghostbusters.
Which I thought was a solid 3.5 out of 5. Okay, funny movie. Wasn't awesome, but anyway, aside.
There's a lot of pushback because taking these male heroes and turning them female is an affront to everyone.
It's literally destroying white boys' childhood. It's destroying it.
And I wonder how many of these people saw Ghostbusters 2. So
good point.
So there's a bunch of people up in arms about this, and he basically got on a hate train for Leslie Jones, the black woman in the movie, and started basically a brigade of racist memes and stuff against her.
Yes, there was a lot of absolutely terrible stuff. I'm on Twitter, unlike you. Yeah. And I was on Twitter around that time, and I was monitoring a little bit, and just saw some of the stuff put towards Leslie Jones was absolutely the worst kind of racism.
Racism and sexism.
Well, there's a lot of, I'm not even sure if I want to say it, but there's a lot of, Harambe stuff, which is comparing her to
a gorilla.
A gorilla. Yeah, so that's...
Yeah, no, it was disgusting, and, I mean, he reveled in it because he's a troll.
Yeah.
And so, he got famous for that, but he's actually... But up until the scandal, he was going to talk at CPAC. He was getting a book deal. Like he
got invited to be on Real Time with Bill Maher.
Yeah. He was. I mean, he's
a rising star in the conservative
conservative
subculture.
And then a 16-year-old girl from Canada screwed him over.
Julia, not her real name. But I was not aware of this part of the story until today.
And it's fantastic.
But it is glorious. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about Julia?
Alright. So, Julia, a 16-year-old Canadian girl, is not conservative at all, but likes to listen to different viewpoints. And as I said, Milo, love him or hate him, he's interesting to listen to. He is very interesting. So she had listened to a fair bit of Milo. And she's very wise and realized that in some of his old stuff, there was a dirty little secret.
Ooh.
But she waited up until this point where basically these three things were coming up. His fame was like his interview with Bill Maher, his book deal, his speaking position, like everything was turning up. And she dropped the bombshell that there's this old like podcast basically. He was with a bunch of guys. And he ended up promoting or talking well about his pederasty in his past.
Yes.
And promoting it. Now, pederasty is like the Roman thing with the young boy and the older man.
Yeah.
And he promoted it as like, the young boys can learn from the older man. Now, he later tried to correct it and say, I'm talking about like legal age boys. But no, he's talking about 13 years old because that's the age he was when a priest molested him.
Yeah, the guy's still Catholic. He's a very complex individual.
Yeah. So, he's molested by a priest, and, I mean, one could argue psychologically maybe he's trying to, like, not be a victim in that case.
Yes.
And trying to recontextualize it that he was a willing participant. But, as the law states, in pretty much every country...
Yes.
You're 13. You don't have the wherewithal to consent.
So this Julia sent the video to a conservative website, which then
anonymously,
which then posted and disseminated these photos, these interviews and footage of Milo speaking positively about pedophilia.
In 2 occasions, there were 2 very specific ones.
And that cratered him completely. That was very much the fall of Milo.
Yeah.
He lost his speaking engagement at the CPAC. We talked about CPAC a couple times. It's the Conservative Political Action Conference. The big, right-wing, in the States. The
conference.
Right-wing conference.
Yeah.
Donald Trump spoke at it. Steve Bannon had his talking slot. All the big conservative intellectuals and politicians get together.
And he's a conservative celebrity. I argue he still kind of is, just nobody likes him anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a beautiful move too, because you don't disseminate in the liberal ones to say like, oh, look how awful this guy. She sends it to the conservative, like the agency, which as soon as you start, like, it was the Reagan
Battalion.
The Reagan Battalion. So all of a sudden you get these family values, like GOPers, hearing that one of the idols, who they're maybe not super comfortable with, but love that he's like that face, is now,
So there's,
And he's tried to defend himself on multiple counts, and he's just dug it deeper. He went on basically saying, like, consent laws vary from country to country, and tried to walk and say, I'm only talking about consent, like, people, the age is just about right. He didn't say the age was perfect. He said the age is just about right. And he's like, then he starts talking about, but some kids are more mature at a younger age, and I was one of, and then like, nope!
It gets into it goes without saying that this is extremely shaky, quicksand-like ground that he sank deep.
And I mean, the funny thing is, I could see him actually being able to talk his way out of this, potentially, if you just straight up dismiss the comments and say, I was being stupid, I wasn't speaking right. But he tried to stand behind his comments while recontextualizing them, and that just dug him deeper in the grave.
Well, he's not one to apologize for anything. It's not apologizing for something is not how the Trumpian conservative is.
But I mean,
that makes you seem weak.
But he's a troll, and he didn't use that as an excuse. And so he lost the speaking position. He lost the book deal that he had. It was like he already got a forward of money for it, and it was going to be a big thing. And they completely dropped him.
He resigned from his position at Breitbart.
Breitbart couldn't be around him, and
when you end up quitting from Breitbart due to behavior, you have screwed up royally.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit on the rise of fall of Milo.
So the question now is, what's he doing now?
Well, he is running for a ceremonial position at a Glasgow university and saying he wants to ban a Muslim group.
Yep.
To protect the gays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he's also on just 8 days ago, put up another video.
No, a videotape emerged.
A videotape emerged. And he's now saying, in that video, he's saying that, like, child sexual abuse, not really big of a deal. So it's further cementing this in people's minds.
And here's the quote from the article. And appreciated child abuse victims, whom he called whining, selfish brats, for drawing attention to their abuse and publicly identifying their abusers 20 years after the abuse have occurred.
Yeah, he has issues. I mean, he's called trans people, like, mentally completely unwell, and he's so that's why I want to cover him mostly in news that doesn't matter, because I do agree that he is something worthwhile talking to, because it is indicative of, like, what the alt-right is, potentially, and how conservatives deal with stuff, and this is a fairly big blow-up in their face moment with one of their rising stars.
Yep.
But I didn't want to cover him in international news, because I do not want to give him that much credit.
Yep.
Because ultimately, give it a year, and people might not even know the name Milo anymore, and it'll be wonderful.
I hope to never hear his name again. But he is good at getting into news, so that probably won't be the case. Well, I think that's about all for today.
I think that just about covers it. So, until next time.
I'm Mandringer.
And I'm the Dino Man.
And that was a Broke Canadian Newscast and Fight Nazis and shit.
Peace.